were you planning on a trip to Queensland this Christmas at all?
It's been a tradition, I think, for 48 years. Jump in the station wagon and head up to Queensland, usually stop off at Port Macquarie or Coffs Harbour at the Big Banana. I've been doing it as a kid, doing it as an adult. I've got family up in Queensland like you too, mate.
Yeah.
But this is the world we live in.
Yeah.
Brendan said it in that report. I think they've got 8 active cases in Queensland at the moment. In Melbourne, they've got 7,600. So this is hard. But if you want to keep people safe, this is what you have to do. And, you know, if you had to pick a place on the east coast of Australia at the moment where you'd want to be, it's Queensland. It's the safest place at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, my family had a trip booked for Queensland this Christmas, so I think now we're going to have to start thinking of something else. But what do you think of the Premier's move?
Well, think about the south coast.
Yeah, we're actually we're looking
bugged by the drought and the bushfires.
We're
and the
actually
flood.
looking there. We're actually looking there. So there you go. But I mean, what do you make of the Premier's decision? I mean, to reduce community transmission. The community transmission might be around for, you know, until deep into next year if there's no vaccine. So you know, that stands to reason that the Queensland border could remain closed until then if what the Premier is promising to do remains true.
Yeah, well, you know, she's saying we'll do everything we can to keep the community safe, and you'd expect her to say that. She's come up for a lot of criticism. You know, we've talked about it on this show a lot, mate, but I think the decisions that she's made over the last few months have been proven to be the right ones. You only have to look at what's happening in Victoria to know that this virus can take off like a rocket. And so follow the medical advice. I'm sure that's what she's doing. If you can lift the borders earlier, terrific. But the most important thing here is we don't want what we've seen overseas and what we've seen take place in Victoria to take place right across the country.
Just on to, still with the Queensland Premier, or all of them for that matter, the Prime Minister has written a letter to them seeking border allowances. So basically this is to stop supply chains from being disrupted. Do you think that is something that should be allowed?
Yeah, it seems like common sense. I saw the story the other day where the PM got involved in helping a little girl cross the border from Victoria to South Australia. She's got hip dysplasia, little 2-year-old kid. Saw another yarn I think there's a boy 16 at Tweed Heads who had trouble getting across the border into Queensland for cancer treatment in Brisbane. You know, these are the sorts of things that we should be able to sort out really easily and create a system where people who are sick and need to get to see a doctor can do it without having to get special permission from a minister, and we can get doctors across the border, we can get farmhands across the border. We can keep the economy working as best as we can within those small regional communities and help sick people to get medical attention without having to have all of these delays and get prime ministers and ministers involved.
Jason, I just had Senator Matt Canavan on the show, and there are reports this morning that suggest the Coalition and the Greens are going to be targeting vulnerable Labor seats over the apparent split in energy at the moment that seems to be troubling the Labor Party. I mean, we could single out Bill Shorten and Anthony Albanese there when it comes to gas. What are your thoughts on this new campaign?
Yeah, sometimes I think the Nats and the Greens are in bed together. You know, this is just silly buggers stuff. Everybody knows, Pete, that gas is going to be part of the energy mix in this country for a long time to come. We're going to use it not just to produce electricity, but to make things. A third of the gas that we pull out of the ground and use here in Australia is for manufacturing. You know, make everything from chemicals to, you know, products for farms. It's as simple as that. The big problem is it costs too much. You could pull gas out of the ground here, put it in a machine, turn it into liquid, put it on a ship, send it to Japan, put it in another machine, turn it into a gas, and it's still cheaper over there than it is here in Australia. This government's been in power for 7 years and they still haven't fixed that. Matt was the minister for a lot of that time. So, you know, what we're saying here is they've got Nev Power putting together a report looking at how we can make gas cheaper and make sure that we've got the supplies that we need here for Australian energy and manufacturing. If they can come up with a good plan, terrific. We're ready and willing to offer bipartisanship.
Is there a party room revolt over energy policy at all?
No. You know, this is all hot air, mate. This is all hot air.
OK, one more issue before we go. Are you expecting, I mean, and there seems to be a bit of a shift in language here when it comes to super, and in particular the Prime Minister. He seems as though he's starting to walk back this legislated move to increase super contributions. Are you concerned that might be starting to come off?
Oh, mate, I think they should be concerned. I don't like giving the Libs sort of free political advice, but be careful what you wish for. If you break this promise and you try and push legislation through the Senate to cut people's superannuation increases, you could be committing political suicide. Remember, John Howard got work choices through the Senate and it cut the incomes of 1 million Australians. If they do this, they'll effectively be cutting the incomes of about 10 million Aussies by cutting their superannuation. So if they think that this is a good idea, not only would they be breaking a promise, but they'd be cutting people's incomes, and I think they'd rue the day.
But aren't you cutting incomes anyway? Because, you know, that the RBA has pointed to this, the Grattan Institute has pointed to this as well, that people may not get pay rises if these increased super contributions go ahead.
Well, Pete, that explains those massive pay increases that happened over the last few years when super didn't go up, doesn't it? You know, this is just a rubbish argument. We didn't have superannuation increase over the last few years. We haven't had massive pay increases either. So the bottom line here is if they cut superannuation, then there's going to be a pay cut. There's no guarantees here that salaries are going to go up. It's typical Liberal agenda. They're always interested in freezing and cutting superannuation. There's a couple of things you can always guarantee in politics. The Labor Party is going to defend and fight for Medicare and for superannuation, and the Libs, wherever they can, are determined to cut it.
But isn't it you know, worth arguing the fact that COVID-19 has changed the game here? That perhaps, you know, if these super increases aren't increased now, maybe it can be done further down the track rather than right now when a lot of businesses are struggling and they can't afford to pay.
That's always the Liberal argument. Throw it down the track. Throw it down the track. You're right that COVID is asking us to revisit and think about some of the things that we've got wrong that we need to fix or that we need to change for the future. You know, one of them's aged care. This has exposed that aged care is a disaster, needs to be fixed. It shows that there's big problems in the IR system. You've got a third of workers without sick leave, forced to go to work, sick, spreading the virus in places like Victoria. The other's manufacturing, shows that there's a lot of stuff we need to be able to make here in Australia. There's nothing to say that we're not going to have another pandemic caused by something else in 10 years' time. So, you know, the political parties in this country need to identify what are these big problems coming at us down the track. What has coronavirus taught us that we need to fix? But one thing's for certain, Aussies need superannuation, otherwise they're going to retire poor.
OK, Jason Clare, always good to get your thoughts. Thanks for joining us this morning. We'll talk to you again soon.